They said they wanted me there. They swore it wasn't the same without me. "Come on down, Grandma," they'd said. "We want you with us for Thanksgiving." So I went. I packed my pecan pie dish, I packed my cardigan, I packed every ounce of tenderness I had left, and I waited. I stood at gate 3 Amperes at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, under the arrivals board with my rolling suitcase beside me, my coat folded neatly over my arm. People rushed past with flowers, balloons, and small children holding signs. Some were hugging, some were crying, all were expected. I stood there like an unclaimed package. The plane had landed 42 minutes ago. I'd checked twice. I had also read the text from my daughter-in-law 3 times. "We'll be there. The kids can't wait to see you." Followed by a heart emoji. I'd texted back, "Flight lands at 3. Can't wait to hug everyone." No reply. I kept my coat folded. It was warm inside. I didn't sit down because I felt that if I sat I would be giving in, giving up. I didn't want to look like a woman who had been forgotten. At some point my phone buzzed. Not a call, not even a text, just a social media notification. My heart sped up. Not because I cared for such things, but because sometimes that's where my family posts pictures before they remember to call me. I opened the app. There they all were. My son Greg, in the navy blue sweater I'd sent him last year. His wife Melissa, smiling, tan as always. The children, Eric and Roxanne, crowded around a table with candles, a roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, a pecan pie that wasn't mine. They were all raising a glass, the caption, "Full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." My eyes scanned the frame once more. There was no mistake. There was no seat for me at that table. I didn't cry. Not then. I just turned, put on my coat, and started walking out of the terminal, past the taxis, past the shuttle bus signs. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to wait for them to remember me. 3 days before my flight, Greg had called. That should have been a clue. My son doesn't usually call unless it's a birthday, a bill is due, or there's a problem. But this time his voice was too sweet, unnaturally cheerful. "Hey, Mom, doing anything for Thanksgiving?" I told him I was planning on staying home, roasting a small chicken, maybe a pumpkin pie if my hands were up to it, watch an old movie. "Nothing special," I said, "just me and the radio." He paused, as if calculating something. "Well," he said, "the kids were asking about you. I thought maybe you'd want to come down this year. Everyone's going to be together. It wouldn't feel right without you." That part, "it wouldn't feel right without you," stirred something in me. It had been a long time since I'd felt truly wanted anywhere. Needed, yes, called upon, depended on, but not wanted. There's a difference. So I said yes. I said I'd find a flight. Greg didn't offer to book it or reimburse me, and I didn't ask. I still had the rainy day envelope of cash I'd put aside for emergencies. I figured this qualified. After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a moment, my fingers still clenched. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt excitement. Not worry, not anxiety, not obligation, just real excitement. The last time someone had invited me somewhere without a request attached, it had been years. I booked the ticket that evening, found a nonstop flight on sale. I even paid an extra $50 for a seat with more legroom. It felt foolish, but I figured if I was going to travel halfway across the country, I might as well do it with a little comfort. The next day, I went shopping not just for presents. I bought 2 books for the kids, and a box of chocolate truffles Melissa used to like. No, I bought something for myself, too. A new cardigan, navy blue, in a soft wool. The kind that hangs just right over your hips and makes you feel like maybe you belong in the picture, too. I was packed 3 days early. I checked the weather in Chicago, set my heat to low. I took the trash out early. I didn't tell my bridge group I was leaving. They'd only ask too many questions, and maybe a part of me didn't want to jinx it. It had been so long since someone said, "Come, we want you here." I flew on Thanksgiving morning. The airport was a crush of people with rolling bags, headphones, and animal-shaped pillows. I smiled at the toddler across the aisle. I shared a look with another older woman reading a book. Both of us with our hands folded in our laps, both with unspoken histories. When the plane landed, I smoothed my skirt and brushed the crumbs from my lap. I put on my good shoes, the black ones with the small heel. I wanted to look like a woman who gets invited places, and I believed I was. right up until the moment I wasn't. The walk from baggage claim to the exit felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of the suitcase. Maybe it was the weight of something else entirely. I pulled my bag past coffee kiosks, families reuniting, a young woman crying with joy, into her boyfriend's shoulder. I felt no bitterness then, just a sense of displacement, as if someone had pressed pause on me while the rest of the world kept moving. Outside, the sky was gray, with that flat Midwestern light that makes even the air feel heavy. My phone was still silent. No texts, no missed calls. I checked the time again. 3:54 p.m. Thanksgiving dinner probably wouldn't start before 5 or 6. Maybe they were busy. Maybe the kids were going wild, or the turkey needed basting. There were a dozen reasons, all of them innocent. But even innocent reasons hurt when you're standing alone at arrivals. I waited on the curb for another 20 minutes before my knees started to protest. I sat on a bench. I watched strangers get into cars that knew their names. I watched a woman in a down jacket bring her mother-in-law a hot chocolate and a hug. The mother-in-law looked older than me. That hug, short, firm, and real, went straight to an empty part of my chest. At some point, I tried calling. Greg didn't answer. I left a message. I said I'd landed. I said I was at the usual pickup spot, outside door B, under the sign with the airplane. I said I hoped everything was okay and that I'd wait a little longer, but I already knew. I knew before I opened the app again, before the picture loaded, before I saw the cranberry sauce and the long wooden table and the caption about full hearts. This wasn't the first time I'd been forgotten, but it was the first time I let myself admit it was happening. I got up, brushed off my coat, and pulled my suitcase behind me. No taxi, no Uber, just me and the sidewalk. A man pushing a cart offered a tired smile. I nodded back. It's funny how in airports, or just outside them, you sometimes feel more seen by strangers than by your own blood. It was nearly 5 p.m. now. The air had turned sharper, the kind of cold that slips under your collar and asks, "What now?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking. My shoes were not made for this much pavement, but I didn't stop. About a half-mile down, just past the rental car return, I saw it. A low, small building with a neon sign, Kate's Diner. The neon flickered. The windows were fogged with warmth from inside. Someone had taped paper stars to the glass. I went in. A bell over the door chimed. Inside, the diner smelled of fried food and cinnamon, vinyl on the booths, yellowed menus, a counter with cracked stools. There were maybe 6 people inside. A man in a UPS jacket, an older couple eating in silence, a waitress with a short ponytail who looked up when I entered and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Honorable." "You too," I said, surprised at the steadiness of my own voice. I chose a booth by the window, slid in. The seat was warm, the table was clean. I took off my coat. "Kitchen's running slow today," the waitress said, handing me a menu. "But we've got turkey and we've got pie." "Pie sounds good," I said. "What kind?" She smiled, a wide, genuine thing. "Pumpkin, pecan, or apple?" "Pumpkin, and some tea, please." "You got it." I looked out the window while I waited. My suitcase sat beside me like an obedient dog. My phone, lying face down on the table, buzzed once. I didn't turn it over. The pie came. It was warm, with a dollop of whipped cream that was leaning just slightly. The tea was strong and a little bitter. Exactly how I like it. I took a bite, then another. It was the best piece of pie I had eaten in years. Maybe not because of the spices or the flaky crust. Maybe because, for once, I hadn't made it for anyone else. I ate slowly. I didn't rush, I didn't scroll, I didn't wait for someone to show up and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. They weren't coming. Not today, maybe not ever. And yet, there I was, whole, breathing, sitting in a diner under paper stars, letting the warmth return to my fingers. When the waitress brought the check, she asked, "Want another slice to go?" I thought about it for a moment, then I nodded. "Yes, for later." She winked. "Best decision you'll make all day." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because she was right. The air had gotten sharper when I stepped back outside. The small white bag with my second piece of pie dangled from one hand, my suitcase rolling behind me with a quiet plastic thud. I had no plan, no hotel booked. No one was waiting, but somehow I didn't feel lost. Not completely. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you finally stop expecting the people who hurt you to be the ones to fix it. The wind picked up as I walked. It wasn't far to the nearest cheap motel. I'd seen the sign on my way from the airport. Valley View Motel. Weekly rates available. It was nothing fancy. A square, low-slung building with beige paint and a vending machine by the front door, but the lights were on, and right now, that was enough. In the lobby, the man behind the counter was watching a football game on a tiny TV. He looked up when I came in, his face a map of boredom and the smell of fried food. Need a room? Yes, just for one night, I said. A single. I looked down at myself. My good shoes were scuffed from the walk. My cardigan smelled faintly of airplane. I nodded. A single. He pushed a form across the counter. ID and a card. I gave them to him. While he typed, I glanced at the TV. Some team in red and gold was losing badly. The man didn't seem to care. Room 114, he said, handing me a key on a thin ring. End of the row. I took it, thanked him, and pulled my suitcase along the walkway. The room was exactly what I'd expected. 2 lamps with mismatched shades, a bedspread in muted browns, a television older than both my children, but it was warm. It had a working heater and a surprisingly clean bathroom. I took off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed. My feet ached, my back ached more, but my heart, the part that should have been shattered, felt strangely intact. I looked at my phone for a long time before I turned it back over. 3 missed calls from Greg, 2 from Melissa, 1 text. Mom, where are you? No apology, no explanation, just surprise. As if I were the one who had disappeared, as if I had failed to show up, I didn't reply. Instead, I unzipped my suitcase, took out my notebook, the one I use for grocery lists and thoughts I never say out loud, and on a fresh page I wrote, I am not an afterthought. I am not an optional extra. I am not a side dish at someone else's table. I stared at the sentence for a long time, then I underlined it. I might have cried a year ago, 5 years ago I would have cried, but tonight the tears didn't come. What came instead was a strange clarity, like stepping into cold water. Shocking, but clean. It wasn't just about this dinner or the airport. It was about the years leading up to it. The birthdays they'd skipped, the voicemails left unanswered, the last-minute invitations that always sounded like obligations, never like joy. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago when Melissa called and said, "We'd love to have you if it's not too much trouble for you to get here." That pause in her voice, the way she'd said it. I remembered Greg's 40th birthday. I'd sent him a leather wallet with his initials embossed. He'd sent a group text. Thanks for the gifts, everyone. I remembered Roxanne's school play, how I'd found the live stream online myself and watched on my little laptop with a glass of wine and a lump in my throat. She didn't know I was watching. No one ever mentioned it, and I kept showing up. Until today. Maybe you have to be left standing on a curb in another city to see the shape of what's been there all along. I wasn't a part of their lives. I was an accessory, a convenience, a filler for when they needed to remember their better selves. I looked around the motel room ugly, honest, functional. It was the most honest place I had been in years. I got up, made myself a cup of the in-room tea using the plastic coffee maker, and sat cross-legged on the bed with my second piece of pie. No china plate, no linen napkin, just the white paper bag and a plastic fork. And yet, it tasted like something I had earned. There was a crack in the ceiling of the motel room that ran above the bed like a road map. I watched it while the heater hissed and clanked. Outside, I could hear the wind scraping against the siding and the occasional rumble of an engine from the nearby highway. A man 2 rooms down coughed, a deep, wet, miserable sound. A toilet flushed somewhere. It wasn't a quiet night, but it was an honest one. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off to sleep, the scratchy blanket pulled up to my chin, my notebook still open on the nightstand. I slept in the clothes I arrived in, too tired to change, too weary to unpack again. In the morning, I woke up before sunrise. It's a habit I've never lost. Even in retirement, my body insists on being useful before 6. I made another cup of weak coffee from the in-room maker and watched the sky lighten through the blinds. The pie was gone, the tea was gone, but the quiet remained. At 7:01, My phone buzzed. Mom, I am so sorry. There was a mix-up with the pickup. We thought your flight was tomorrow. Can you come to the house today? The kids really want to see you, Greg. No explanation for the photo, no mention of the dinner, no apology for posting a holiday picture without me, just a mix-up and can you? I looked at the message, then put the phone down. I didn't reply. Instead, I got dressed, brushed my hair, put on some lipstick. It wasn't for them. I wasn't going. It was for my own dignity, a reminder that I still got to decide how I presented myself to the world, even if no one was looking. In the lobby, there was a bowl of bruised apples and a pot of coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. I took an apple and slipped it in my bag. I checked out. The man at the desk barely looked up from the football game summary. Outside, it was cold and clear. The wind had died down. The sky was the kind of brittle blue you only get in November. Sharp, high, and endless. I didn't go straight back to the airport. Instead, I walked. There was something I had to do first. A mile away, tucked between a gas station and a shuttered tire shop, was a small USPS branch. I went inside and asked for an envelope and a pen. "You sell stamps?" I asked. "Sure do," the clerk said. She was young, pleasant, with chipped nail polish. "I need one for a letter to Philadelphia," I said. She handed it to me, and I wrote the address from memory. Emily Wilson, 12 Stour Street, Philadelphia, PA. My granddaughter. Emily was Greg's daughter from his first marriage, the only one who still called me just to talk. She was 23 now, finishing nursing school. She sent me pictures of her cat. She told me when she passed her exams. She asked for my cheesecake recipe. The envelope sat empty for a moment. Then I took a page from my notebook and began to write. "Emily, my love, you told me once that I was your safe place. I want you to know that hearing that meant more to me than most things in this world. This holiday didn't go as planned. I flew halfway across the country for a table I was never meant to sit at, but I found something in the silence I didn't expect. Space. Space to remember who I am without waiting for someone else to say it first." I kept writing. Not bitter, not dramatic, just true. When I sealed the envelope, I felt lighter. At 10:35 a.m., I booked a flight home. Same airline, same gate. A different woman getting on the plane. The flight wasn't until that evening, so I found a coffee shop near the terminal with big windows and good buttered rolls. I sat there for hours with my tea and my pen, thinking through things that had been left unsaid for too long. I didn't text Greg. I didn't call Melissa. I didn't tell them where I was. They'd see the missed call back. Maybe they'd wonder, maybe they wouldn't. I wasn't angry, I was finished with it. Around 4 p.m., the light changed, the kind of golden haze that makes even parking lots look beautiful. I watched a little boy run toward a minivan, his backpack bouncing. He turned and waved to his grandmother, who was slower, but smiling. She waved back, and he ran to her, grabbing her hand like she was his anchor. I watched them until they were gone, and I whispered to myself, not loud, not bitter, just clear. I deserve that too. The plane home was only half full, a true blessing. I had a whole row to myself. The window seat was cold where I sat, and I left it that way. I didn't bother folding my coat or smoothing the seatbelt over my lap. For the first time in a long time, I felt no need to arrange myself for someone else's comfort. The flight attendant offered a gentle smile. "Going home or leaving it?" she asked, setting a plastic cup of water on my tray table. "Both," I said in a way. She didn't ask for more, just nodded and moved on. That quiet understanding, rare and kind. I watched out the window during takeoff, saw the gray city shrink beneath us, the runways crisscrossing like faded scars. As the plane climbed, the sky opened up, wider, bluer above and below, and in between, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the engines and my own breath. I thought I would feel sad again, some wave of it. I waited for it like you wait for turbulence, but it didn't come. I didn't feel peaceful either. Not yet, but I felt still. Rooted. Present. That was new. Halfway through the flight, I took my phone out of my bag and turned it on again. I told myself I was just checking the time, but of course the notifications started to flood in. 4 texts from Greg, 1 voicemail. "Mom, I'm really sorry. Please call. The kids were asking where you are. Melissa said she thought you knew we pushed the dinner back a day. Can we please talk? I didn't open the voicemail. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there. Let it wait. Just like I had. I turned the phone off again. When we landed, it was dark. My own small town was lit up, quiet and familiar. The shuttle driver who took me to the parking lot was an older man with a twinkle in his eye. He asked if I'd been visiting family, and I smiled and said, "Not exactly." At home, the porch light was still on. I'd left it on out of habit, as if I expected to return, tired and full, tucked into the warmth of family. Instead, I walked in with pie in a bag, and a mind sharper than it had been in years. My house smelled of lavender and old wood. The radiator clanked with a comforting thud. I set down my suitcase and hung up my coat. I moved slowly, not with age but with intention. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had hosted Thanksgiving for years, where Greg once spilled gravy and Emily once cut snowflakes out of napkins, where Melissa had sat tight-lipped, looking at her phone more than my face. I looked around the room as if it belonged to someone I was just getting to know. Then I opened the drawer beside the fridge, the file drawer, the one marked Greg and Emily in legal. I took out Greg's folder. It was thick. Bills, copies of checks, printouts for help with tuition payments, an invoice from a mechanic I'd helped him pay when his transmission went out, the cosign on his 2010 mortgage, the down payment on Roxanne's private preschool that I'd fronted, with a note in Melissa's handwriting. "We'll pay you back when we get our bonuses." They never did. I turned each page carefully, like dressing a wound. Not in anger, not even in sorrow, but with clarity. Then I reached for the thinner folder, the one marked Emily. Birthday cards, pictures she'd sent me, a printout of her graduation announcement, handwritten notes in bubbly ink, a thank you for helping with a course fee, a postcard from Vermont. "Wish you were here. The fall is crazy beautiful." I closed both folders and sat back. Then I reached for my notebook, and this time I wasn't writing about feelings. I was writing a plan. The next morning, I was at the bank before the doors opened. A light frost coated the steps, making them slick, but I walked up them slowly and steadily, in my oldest shoes and that same navy cardigan. The sweater didn't match my scarf, but I wasn't concerned with appearances anymore. I was concerned with action. The teller, a young man with kind eyes and a nervous smile, greeted me with the politeness people reserve for the elderly. "Good morning, Mrs. Wallace. How can we help you today?" "I'd like to speak with someone about my accounts," I said. "All of them." He nodded, glanced at his screen, then called to the back. A few minutes later, I was ushered into a glass-walled office with soft chairs and the faint smell of printer ink. A woman named Natalie introduced herself as my account manager. She looked like the kind of person who does yoga on her lunch break and always has almonds in her purse. "What can I do for you today, Mrs. Wallace?" "I want to suspend all automatic payments, every single one starting today." She blinked. "All of them?" "Yes." She typed a few keys. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned the screen. "You have quite a few recurring transfers to family members, tuition, car insurance, and also a few scheduled donations to charities." "Leave the charities," I said. "Stop the rest." There was a long pause. "Would you like to talk about why?" I looked at her. Really looked at her, and to her credit, she didn't fill the silence with fake concern. "No," I said. "I've spent enough time explaining myself." She nodded. "I understand." While she worked, I sat in the quiet of that office and watched the world move outside the window. A mother strapping a toddler into a car seat, an older man pushing a walker, a delivery truck idling for too long. "Done," Natalie said finally. "Everything is suspended. I'll get the paperwork ready for full cancellation if you'd like to come in tomorrow to sign." "I will." She hesitated. "There's also a power of attorney on file. Greg Wallace. Do you still want him to have access?" I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. "No," I said. "Revoke it." "I see." She printed a form, and I signed it with a steady hand. When I left the bank, the frost had melted. I walked without rushing. I stopped at the bakery on the corner and bought myself a fresh roll and took the long way home. This wasn't about punishing Greg. Not entirely. This was about drawing a line I had failed to draw before. about realizing that love doesn't just grow from sacrifice, it needs light, it needs truth. Back home, I took my pecan pie dish out of my bag. I washed it gently and put it away. Maybe I'd bake another pie someday. Maybe I wouldn't. But I wouldn't be baking it for people who left me on a curb. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. Mr. Adamson had been handling our affairs for over 30 years. He helped us buy the house, settle my husband's will, and even draft the first version of mine back in 2005. His voice was warm but cautious. "Irene, how can I help?" "I'd like to make some changes to my estate," I said, "and I want to set up a trust for Emily." He didn't ask why. People like Mr. Adamson have seen every version of family disappointment that exists. We made an appointment for the next day. When I hung up the phone, I felt no triumph, no victory, just clarity. That night, I sat on my front porch with a blanket around my shoulders and my tea growing cold on the railing. A few neighbors walked by. One waved, one didn't. The street was quiet, and I felt not okay, not healed, but steady, like I had finally stopped knocking on a door that was never going to open. The next morning, the sky was soft and low, that pale winter gray that wraps around houses like gauze. I dressed slowly, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to rush what was coming. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was at Mr. Adamson's office, a small 2-story building with green shutters and a reception area that smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. The same gold-framed photos were where they'd always been: his kids, his boat, his bulldog, and a Santa hat. He stood when I walked in, as courtly as he'd been 20 years ago. "Irene," he said, holding out a hand. "Good to see you." "You too, Mr. Adamson." We sat in his office. The same leather chairs, the same ticking wall clock, the same stack of forms on his desk. Though now, his reading glasses were thicker, and his mustache had gone from salt and pepper to snow white. "What are we changing today?" he asked gently. "My will," I said. "And I'm creating a trust. Everything I have, every penny, every asset, I want it protected, and I want it to go to Emily. Only Emily." He didn't blink, just nodded and pulled out a legal pad. "I assume we're removing Greg and Melissa." "Yes, they've had enough from me. More than enough." He looked up at that but didn't comment. "I want it airtight," I continued. "No back doors, no loopholes. Emily is the beneficiary. She gets everything when I'm gone. And until then, she can draw from the trust for education, housing, healthcare, or emergencies. I will be the one who decides what counts as an emergency." Adamson smiled slightly. "You've given this some thought. My house, my retirement account, my CDs, everything. If it has my name on it, it goes into the trust. I understand. And you wish to maintain full control during your lifetime, of course." "Exactly." He leaned back. "Emily's a good kid, always was." I felt something tighten in my throat. She's the only one who still sees a person instead of a wallet. Mr. Adamson didn't flinch at the bitterness in my voice. "Then let's make sure your wishes are honored." For the next hour, we went through every line item. He asked questions. I gave firm answers. No more wavering, no more benefit of the doubt. When we got to the end, he gathered the papers into a folder and looked at me with something close to admiration. "The final draft will be ready in a few days," he said. "We'll get it notarized and it will be done." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. Outside, the air had turned crisp. I walked home slowly, stopping once to buy a small poinsettia from the florist. I didn't decorate much anymore, but I wanted something bright on the kitchen table, something alive. The moment I walked in the door, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. "Grandma?" It was Emily. Her voice was breathy, nervous, warm. "I got your letter." I sat down at the kitchen table. "You did?" I didn't know what happened. Dad and Melissa said you canceled your flight last minute. They made it sound like you just changed your mind." "Of course they did." "I was there," I said quietly. "I landed. I waited. I saw the pictures." Emily went silent. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." "I know, sweetheart. It's not your fault." "I should have called. I should have checked." "You didn't know. You weren't the one who made the decision." She sniffled on the other end. "I missed you so much that day. It didn't feel right without you." For the first time since the airport, tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. Not this time. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. There was a quiet between us, not awkward, just full. Grandma, she said finally, can I come visit next weekend? I have a break from classes. I'll take the train. My heart bloomed with something tender and aching. Of course, I said. The guest room is ready. I'll bring the chessboard, she said. You still play? I never stopped. We hung up a few minutes later. I sat at the table, my hand still resting on the phone. For the first time, I didn't feel forgotten. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. That Saturday, just after noon, I stood at the train station in my warmest coat, watching the passengers get off the 11:37 from Philadelphia. The platform smelled of diesel and old rain. I was clutching a paper bag in my hands, a sandwich and an apple, just in case she'd forgotten to eat. And then there she was. Emily stepped off the train in an oversized hoodie and jeans, her dark curls tucked under a beanie, a worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, sharper somehow. But when she spotted me, her face broke open with something pure and unmistakable. She ran and threw her arms around me like she meant it. It was that simple. No questions, no apologies, no tension hanging in the air between us. Just her arms around me, tight and true. Hi, Grandma, she whispered into my shoulder. Hi, sweetheart, I said. You're here. We drove home in silence for a little while, her watching the streets as if trying to memorize them again, me driving slowly, carefully, letting her take it in. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, but it felt different with her beside me. At home, I made tea while she dropped her bag in the guest room. She came back out with that familiar ease of someone who belongs, curling into the corner of the sofa as if she'd never left. The chessboard was waiting on the coffee table. We played a game. She won. Then we played another. I won that one, fair and square. Later, we sat at the kitchen table, both nursing mugs of tea. The poinsettia I'd bought earlier in the week sat in the middle, still red, still alive. I read your letter again on the train, she said, tracing the rim of her mug. I've never seen you write like that before. I never had to, I said. I used to think being quiet was a form of grace, but lately, I think it just made me easy to ignore. Emily looked at me. I never ignored you. I know. She hesitated. Dad doesn't know I'm here. I figured. He called a few nights ago, asking if I'd seen you since Thanksgiving. I didn't lie, she said. I just said we hadn't spoken yet. It was kinder. She shook her head. It wasn't kindness. It was exhaustion. I'm tired of pretending everything's normal. That surprised me. Emily had always been the careful one, the diplomat, the peacekeeper in her fractured family. Hearing her say that, so calmly, so surely, told me she was growing into something strong. You don't have to pretend here, I said. Never. She nodded. You don't either. We sat in the quiet, sipping our tea, and for the first time in weeks, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need Greg or Melissa to grovel or explain or spin another story about what went wrong. I didn't need a text or a voicemail or a belated invitation. I had this. My house, my tea, my granddaughter. I had myself. That evening, Emily offered to make dinner. She cooked pasta with garlic and spinach, and I grated the cheese, talking about everything and nothing. Then we watched a silly movie and laughed too hard at the parts that weren't that funny. Before bed, she sat next to me on the sofa and said, Grandma, I don't want to lose you. You won't. Promise? I can't promise forever, I said, but I'm not going anywhere for right now. She smiled, then hugged me again, softer this time, but no less true. After she went to bed, I sat in the quiet of the living room. The clock ticked behind me like a slow metronome. I looked at the photos on the mantel. Some faces had faded, some frames were empty now, but one photo still stood proudly. Me, holding Emily as a baby. My hair darker then, my face softer, but the grip of my hands around her tiny body just as sure. I looked at it for a long time, then I got up, turned off the light, and went to bed. Emily left on Sunday afternoon. We lingered on the porch for a moment before her train was due. I handed her a container with the leftover pasta, a folded scarf I'd knitted last winter, and a quiet kind of love I didn't have to explain. She kissed my cheek and promised to call on Tuesday. Then she was gone, A quick wave from the back window of the train, her breath fogging the glass. I stood there until the train had shrunk to nothing, then went back inside. The house felt quieter than usual, but not in a lonely way. It was the quiet that comes after something important has been said. A quiet with shape and weight. I moved slowly through the rooms, collecting mugs, folding the blanket from the sofa, putting the chessboard back on the shelf. When I got to the kitchen, I opened the file drawer again. The papers were where I'd left them. Greg's folder, still thick with IOUs, Emily's, still light. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me. I took out a yellow legal pad and started listing everything I had paid for over the last 15 years. Not just the money transferred directly, but the things I had quietly covered. Home repairs, medical co-pays, the legal fees when Greg left his first wife, the down payment on their second car, the groceries when Melissa was too tired to shop, the school fundraisers I'd been guilted into supporting with a check instead of a visit. Line by line, I wrote them down. When I was done, the list stretched for 4 pages. It was strange. I hadn't thought of myself as generous, just useful, dependable, someone who helped because that's what mothers do. It's what I did, but looking at the numbers, I saw it plainly. I had been subsidizing their life, and in return they gave me courtesy. Empty birthday wishes, tired smiles, a chair by the coat rack when there was no room at the main table. I wasn't angry. Not really. I was just done. At 3:17 p.m., my phone rang, Greg's name on the screen. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail, then a text. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Hope everything is okay. Let me know when you're free to talk. No urgency, no detail." Just a vague overture, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't left me standing on a curb in another city while he carved a turkey and took family photos I wasn't meant to see. I deleted the voicemail without listening. I left the text unread. That night, I lit candles. Not for any special occasion, just for the quiet, for the stillness in the house, and the way the light caught the edge of the kitchen counter. I poured myself a glass of wine, one of the good bottles I'd been saving for a real celebration. I set one place at the table, heated a bowl of leftover soup, and sat down. I didn't scroll. I didn't wait. I didn't hope for the phone to ring. I sat in my own life. Later, before bed, I opened my email. I found the folder marked Travel. At the bottom was the confirmation for my Thanksgiving flight. Round trip, completed. I forwarded it to myself, then added a note in the subject line, proof of departure and return. No rescue, no reunion, just me. I didn't send it to anyone else. I didn't have to. The next morning, I called Mr. Adamson again. "I've been thinking," I told him. "I want to add a clause to the trust." "Of course," he said. "What did you have in mind?" "I want Emily to be the sole executor, but I also want to include a letter. Non-legal, personal." "You can include a statement of intent," he said. "It won't change the legality, but it can clarify your reasons." "Good," I said. "Then I'll write it." That same morning, I sat down and began to write. To whomever is reading this after I'm gone, if you are wondering why things have been divided this way, let me be clear. This is not punishment. It is honesty. I have spent a lifetime giving quietly, consistently, but love without respect is not love. Presence without care is not family. I have chosen the one person who saw me before I disappeared. I didn't finish the letter that day. There was no need to rush. Some things deserve to be written slowly. Tuesday came and went with no call from Emily. Not because she forgot, but because that's what we'd agreed. She had clinicals this week and didn't want to be distracted. "I'll call on Friday," she'd said, "after my shift, same time." I trusted her. That morning, though, someone else called. Melissa. Her name glowed on my screen like a warning sign. Bright letters and bad timing. I let it ring. Then, 30 seconds later, a text. "Hi Irene, hope you're doing well. Greg mentioned you've been hard to reach lately. Let's catch up soon. No punctuation where it mattered, no warmth where it counted. Let's catch up." We weren't old colleagues. We weren't neighbors who had borrowed sugar once. I had been her mother-in-law for nearly 15 years. I had helped her find her first real job after Roxanne was born. I had sent her care baskets when she had her gallbladder removed. I had paid for the flowers at her mother's funeral when their budget was too tight. "Let's catch up." I put the phone down without answering. Later that afternoon, as if on cue, another text came through. This time from Greg. Mom, Melissa tried calling. We're starting to get worried. Can you just let us know you're okay? The irony. They'd left me at an airport, but now they were worried. Not when I was standing with my suitcase and no ride. Not when I was walking to a diner with frozen fingers. Not when they posted a picture of themselves all hugging each other with no room for me. But now, when the silence was returned to them, they panicked. Silence is a powerful thing. It unnerves people who are used to your noise, your giving, your yes. I turned my phone off for the rest of the day. That evening I went through the attic, not for any dramatic reason, just to find an old recipe book Emily had asked about once, the one with my apple pie recipe scrawled in the margins. I hadn't been up there in years. The boxes smelled of dust and old pine wood, and the insulation was rolled up like forgotten paper. In one box marked 1992-2005, I found the book, and underneath it, letters. Dozens of them. Cards from Greg as a teenager, drawings from Emily as a child, thank you notes from long-moved-away friends and cousins, a photo of my husband in his Sunday suit, holding a pie like a trophy. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and let the past rest in my lap. So many pieces of myself I'd put away to make room for others. I thought about Greg as a little boy, how he'd insisted on sleeping with his head on my chest because your heart beats louder than the rain, how he'd cried if I left for work too early, how I taught him to tie his shoes with 2 loops instead of 1 because it made more sense to him that way. I had loved him so completely once. Maybe I still did. But love doesn't excuse neglect, and forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Not always. I put the letters away carefully, closed the box, and that night, when the house was dark and the world was quiet, I opened my notebook and added 2 more lines to the letter for the trust. I didn't want my last act to be polite. I wanted it to be clear. Emily, you saw me not out of duty. Not for what I gave, but because you chose to. That is what family is. A choice, a respect, a truth. The pen felt heavier than usual in my hand, but I wrote it anyway. The next day, I drove into town and went straight to the notary. It was in the back of a shipping store, behind shelves of bubble wrap and a rack of greeting cards. The man behind the counter had kind hands and a long, careful way of speaking. His name tag said David. I need to have a letter witnessed, I said, laying out the pages I'd written and the few trust documents my lawyer had prepared. He glanced at the first page, then back at me. Big changes? I nodded. Long overdue. He didn't ask more. He just handed me a pen and walked me through each signature with the quiet efficiency of someone who has seen all manner of endings and beginnings pass over his counter. When it was done, I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but clearer, as if the road ahead had fewer bends. Afterward, I stopped at the grocery store. I bought milk and oranges and a bouquet of lilacs that were marked half off, the kind of things you buy when life is steady again. When you're choosing your own peace, instead of waiting for someone else to hand it to you. At home, I put the flowers in a chipped vase next to the kitchen sink. The smell of lilac slowly filled the house, soft and sure. I took off my coat, folded it, and laid it over the back of a chair. My phone buzzed as I was putting the groceries away. Greg, again. Mom, we really need to talk. You're not answering and it's making things worse. I don't know what's going on, but we're worried. Please call me. The text was longer than usual. The signs of panic were there, but still, no real apology, no mention of what happened, no accountability, just an absence. And now, the discomfort of it. He wasn't sorry he'd forgotten me. He was sorry I had stopped filling in the gaps. I sat, stared at the screen, then turned it off again. That afternoon, I took out Greg's folders, Emily's, the trust packet, and I locked them all in my fireproof box. I slid it back under the bed. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I was done. Done explaining, done asking, done waiting. That night, I made soup. Lentil, carrot, garlic. My hands still knew how to measure by instinct. I was cooking for one, not for an absence. I set the table not in mourning, but in ritual, in respect for myself. The soup was good. Later, I sat on the porch again, wrapped in a shawl. The air was crisp enough to feel like something was changing. And as the streetlights came on, one by one, I remembered a moment I hadn't thought of in years. Greg was 10. He'd come home from school with a split lip and mud on his jeans. Another boy had pushed him on the playground during recess. He didn't cry, just stood at the sink, rinsing the blood from his hands, saying, "It's fine, it's nothing." I'd knelt beside him and said, "It's okay to be hurt. It doesn't make you weak." I wish someone had told me that. Because I had been hurt, quietly, consistently, for years, and I had let it go on because I thought endurance was a virtue. But it isn't. Not always. Sometimes it's just a delay. Sometimes it's just the cost of silence. I sipped my tea slowly, let the night press in. The flowers in the kitchen swayed slightly in the draft, a blurred patch of purple in the dark. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car pulled into a driveway. Someone laughed, sharp and high, the sound of another life. And I sat in my own, no questions, no waiting, just the weight of my own belonging. Whole, at last. It was late on a Friday afternoon when I heard the knock. I was folding laundry at the kitchen table, mostly towels, still warm from the dryer when I heard it. 3 slow knocks, not the mailman, not a neighbor, the kind of knock that carried hesitation with it. I opened the door, and there was Melissa. Her hair was too perfect, as if it had been brushed and sprayed in the car. She was wearing heels too narrow for our sidewalks and a handbag slung over her arm. Her face wore that practiced expression I'd come to know. Part concern, part performance. "Irene," she said. Her voice was almost gentle. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood back and let her in. She looked around as she entered, as if expecting dust or neglect. The house looked the same, but something in the air had shifted. I knew it, and I think she did too. I led her to the living room. She didn't sit until I did. She placed her bag carefully at her feet and folded her hands in her lap. "I know you're upset," she started. Her tone was already polished. "And I just want to say, this whole thing was a huge misunderstanding." "Nothing," she continued. "Greg thought your flight was on Friday. That's what he told me. We didn't realize you had already landed." "And the picture?" I asked. She blinked. "What?" "The Thanksgiving picture. The caption that said, 'Full house. Everyone smiling at the table.'" She looked down. "That was just something I posted for the holiday. I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." She looked up again, too quickly. "Well, yes, but I think we need to put this behind us now. The kids miss you. Greg has been calling. We're all just worried. You've closed yourself off from us." I let out a small breath. "No, I've just stopped filling in the silence for you. It's different." Her mouth tightened. "I came here because we want to make things right." I looked at her then, really looked, at the effort behind her makeup, at the impatience hiding in her posture, at the avoidance she wore like perfume. "You didn't come to make things right," I said. "You came to see if I was still useful." She sat up straighter. "That's unfair. But it's true." She glanced toward the hallway, as if Greg might appear and rescue her from this conversation. "I've given enough," I said quietly. "More than enough. And I've decided where the rest of it goes." That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm not bitter. I'm just finished." "Irene," she said, and her voice was tighter now, colder. "This isn't like you." "I know," I said. "It is now." There was a pause. She shifted in her seat. "Does Greg know you've made changes?" She glanced toward the hallway, as if Greg might appear and rescue her from this conversation. "I've given enough," I said quietly. "More than enough. And I've decided where the rest of it goes." Her face went pale. "Your accounts, the arrangements." The silence after that was thick, a reckoning of sorts. Finally, she reached for her bag and stood up. "Well," she said, her tone brittle now, "I'm sorry you feel that way." I smiled, a small thing. "You're not. You're sorry I've stopped accepting less than I deserve." She didn't reply, just turned and walked to the door. At the threshold, she hesitated. "Greg is really worried." "He should be," I said, "not because I'm gone, but because I'm not coming back." The door closed behind her with the quietest click. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the knob, the air still humming from the exchange. Then I went back to the kitchen, finished folding the towels, lit the candles, made a cup of tea. The phone rang once that evening. Greg, again. I let it ring. Not out of cruelty, but because the silence, finally, was mine. Saturday came quietly. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because my body had settled back into a rhythm that wasn't governed by expectation or the noise of someone else's schedule. The sky outside was pale and soft, the kind of morning that neither presses nor promises. It just is. I took my tea to the front porch and sat under the faded quilt I kept on the back of the wicker chair. Steam rose slowly from the mug. A child yelled somewhere down the street, followed by the sound of a skateboard. Winter was still holding its breath, but not for long. I thought about Melissa's visit, not with regret, not with anger, just with curiosity, as if I were watching someone else remember a conversation they never really had. She hadn't come for peace, she had come for control. And for the first time in a long time, I hadn't given it to her. It was a victory, of sorts. Not in winning, not in being right, but in staying rooted, in ceasing to perform grace just so others could be comfortable. That afternoon, Emily called. Her voice was bright over the line. "Hi, Grandma. I'm on my break, but I wanted to check in. How was your week?" "Eventful," I said, sipping my second cup of tea. "But quiet." She picked up on the tone. "Something happened?" Melissa stopped by. "Oh," she said. "She and Greg wanted to make things right." "Did they really?" Emily let out a breath through her teeth. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't shaken either. There was a pause on her end. Then she said quietly, "You sound different." "Do I?" "Stronger." "I think I am." We talked for a while about her clinicals, a paper she was writing, the cat who had knocked over her favorite lamp, the everyday things that make up a real life. When we hung up, I didn't feel that familiar ache of absence. I felt connected, present, full. Later, I spent the afternoon sorting through drawers in the spare room, not with any urgency, but because I felt ready to decide what mattered. I found a set of linens I hadn't used in years. Emily might like them. A pair of earrings I'd once been saving for Roxanne's 16th birthday, before I learned that gifts from me were left unopened in drawers or disappeared entirely. I held the earrings for a long time. Silver, simple, classic. I had bought them when Roxanne was still a child, imagining the moment she would stand in front of the mirror, putting them in her ears before a school dance. But now, they felt like symbols of something that was never mine to hold. I put them aside, not bitterly, just finally. That evening, I wrote in my notebook again. Not a letter this time, just a list. Things I no longer owe. Explanations. Second chances for people who waste the first one. An apology for taking up space, for a seat at a table that won't make room. Silence. And then, next to it, I wrote another list, things I still have. My name. My peace. My mind. My home. My granddaughter's voice in my ear saying, "Stronger." I tore out the page and folded it in half. I taped it to the back of the cabinet door under the sink, where only I would see it, where I kept the dish gloves and extra sponges. A strange place for strength, but a true one. That night, I set the table for one again, but this time I lit 2 candles, not because someone else was coming, but because I was fully there. I sat, served myself soup, and whispered, not for drama, not for pain, but because it needed to be said, I am still here, and I was. The first Sunday of December, I spent the afternoon decorating my porch. Nothing fancy, just a simple pine wreath with a red ribbon and 2 strings of warm white lights along the railing. I wasn't doing it for the neighbors or for nostalgia. I was doing it because I wanted the house to shine for me. Just once. Inside, I put the kettle on, turned on the old radio, and let slow jazz drift through the rooms. I used to decorate for the kids' stockings with their names, star-shaped cookies, and the old felt angel Emily once made in preschool. But this year, there would be no stockings, no extra chairs, no waiting. This year, I lit the fire early and set one place for tea, my own. Before the sun had dipped behind the houses across the street, the phone rang. It was Greg again. I answered this time. "Mom." His voice was thinner than I remembered. "I'm here," I said, calm, certain. There was a pause. I didn't think you'd answer." "I know." Another pause. Longer. "I saw the documents," he said, "from the lawyer, the trust, the changes." "I figured you would," He took a sharp breath, as if expecting a different tone. I don't understand. After everything. Another pause. Longer. I saw the documents, he said, from the lawyer, the trust, the changes. He went quiet. You mean the money? He said finally. I mean the pattern, I answered. The forgetting, the late calls, the skipped birthdays, the airport, the picture. It wasn't intentional. No, I said. It was worse. It was convenient. And that was it. The truth spoken aloud without apology. You're punishing us, he said, but it came out less like an accusation and more like a hope that I would deny it, reassure him, break. No, I said, I'm releasing myself from obligation, from old loyalties that only ever went one way, from the guilt I've carried for so long I forgot what lightness felt like. I never thought it would come to this, he mumbled. I know. His voice broke. We're still your family. No, Greg. I was your family. You haven't been mine for a long time. And we were done. Not with a shout, not with a resolution, just with a truth spoken quietly enough to echo for years. I hung up the phone, stood at the window, and watched a streetlight flicker on. The next day, I mailed a small package to Emily. Inside were the silver earrings, wrapped in soft cloth, a copy of the trust, and a note. These are yours. Not because you asked, but because you showed up. Wear them when you feel uncertain. In this house, you are never invisible. Not then, not now, not ever. She called 3 days later, crying and laughing at the same time. Grandma, she said, her voice shaking, I don't know what to say. You already did, I said, the day you asked if you could come. The day you came with no reason needed. That night, I lit the fireplace and sat in its warmth. Outside, the street was quiet, blanketed in the first snow of the season. I watched it fall through the window, slow and clean, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings that had come before. The ones I'd cooked through an ache, the ones I'd sat through quietly, the ones I'd been invited to as an afterthought, and then the one I had given myself. No carving knives, no tablecloths, no seconds, just a walk, a diner, a slice of pie, and the brightest thing I'd ever tasted. Not bitterness, but freedom. And if you are reading this, if you have ever waited for someone who forgot to wait for you, listen closely. You can stop. You can light the candles for yourself. You can buy your own pie. And you can begin again, right here, right now. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to know they are not alone. Your silence has value. Your seat is yours, and you do not need permission to keep it.